I thought doing the right thing meant keeping my mouth shut, even when it cost me money. For years, my life ran on schedules, invoices, and quiet Sunday mornings in the same neighborhood. Then one Tuesday at 6:17 a.m., I noticed a document on my desk dated 3 years in the future. No one mentioned it. No one acted strange. I didn't panic. I went to work. But by that night, I understood something simple. Everything I trusted was already being used against me. I used to believe that if you followed the rules long enough, life would eventually return the favor. That belief shaped everything about my days. I woke up at 5:30 every weekday morning in the same split-level house on the west side of Columbus, Ohio. The alarm on my phone was always set to the same soft chime, not because I liked it, but because it didn't startle me. I liked mornings that eased in, not ones that demanded attention. By 6:10, I was in the kitchen, coffee brewing, toast in the toaster, the local news playing quietly on a small TV mounted above the fridge. Traffic on I-70, weather mostly clear, no surprises. That mattered to me more than I like to admit. I'm 48 years old. I work as a compliance supervisor for a regional logistics company that handles medical supplies, gloves, syringes, hospital equipment. Nothing glamorous, but it's regulated, audited, documented. My job exists to make sure nothing goes missing and nothing violates policy. I've spent nearly 20 years learning how systems fail and how people cut corners when they think no one is watching. At least, that's what I thought my expertise was limited to. I live alone now. My wife, Laura, passed away 5 years ago from an aggressive form of ovarian cancer that didn't care how carefully we followed doctor's instructions. After she died, the house felt too big, so I closed off the guest bedroom and stopped using the dining room. Fewer rooms, fewer memories to walk past. The only person who comes by regularly is my younger sister, Megan. Megan is 39, sharp, efficient, the kind of woman who color codes her calendar and never misses a deadline. After Laura died, she stepped in without being asked, helped with paperwork, sat with me during probate meetings, made sure the mortgage payments stayed on schedule when I couldn't bring myself to open envelopes. When our mother died 2 years later, Megan became the executor of her estate. It made sense. She'd always been better with details. I trusted her completely. Everyone did. On Sundays, Megan comes over around noon. She brings groceries I didn't ask for and insists on cooking lunch, even though I'm perfectly capable of feeding myself. We sit at the kitchen island. She talks about her consulting clients, her workouts, the frustrations of dating in your late 30s. I listen. I nod at the right moments. It's normal, comfortable, predictable. That predictability became my definition of safety. Every month, like clockwork, I reviewed my personal finances on the first Saturday morning. Coffee on the left side of the desk, laptop centered, legal pad to the right. I wrote down balances even though I could see them on the screen. It helped me think. Mortgage, utilities, retirement contributions. A small trust account my mother had set up years ago, managed externally but reported quarterly. Megan handled communication with the trust administrator, forwarding summaries to me by email. I rarely questioned them. The numbers always made sense. At work, I'm known as someone who doesn't overreact. When junior analysts flag something questionable, I don't raise my voice. I ask them to show me the data again. I ask what assumptions they made. I ask what might explain the discrepancy without jumping to conclusions. Systems don't fail, I tell them. People misunderstand systems. That philosophy has served me well. It's why my supervisors trust me. It's why auditors stop pushing when I answer their questions calmly and thoroughly. It's also why I didn't notice how narrow my world had become. After Laura's death, I stopped socializing outside of work and family. I didn't join new groups. I didn't date. I told myself I was content, but really, I had just eliminated variables. Fewer people meant fewer chances for things to go wrong. Megan encouraged me to travel, to take vacations, to start living again. I always declined. Travel disrupts routines. Vacations create gaps. Gaps invite mistakes. So I stayed. On paper, my life was stable. Respectable job, paid off car, modest savings, no debts beyond the mortgage, no drama. I believed that stability was earned, like interest on a long-term investment. Do the right things consistently, and life would eventually stop testing you. That belief was reinforced in small ways, my boss praising my attention to detail, Megan thanking me for trusting her with Mom's estate, emails from the trust administrator that always began with, "Everything is proceeding as expected." Nothing ever felt urgent, until one morning when something was slightly off, and I almost ignored it. It was a Thursday. I remember because the trash went out that morning, and I nearly forgot to bring the bins back in. I sat down at my desk around 6:45 a.m. to review an internal compliance report before heading to the office. My laptop took longer than usual to wake up. When it finally did, my inbox refreshed, and a new message appeared at the top. The subject line was generic. Document review, internal. I assumed it was work-related and opened it without thinking. The email wasn't from anyone at my company. It came from an external domain I didn't recognize, addressed to me by my full legal name. Attached was a single PDF file. No explanation, no greeting. I didn't open the attachment right away. That wasn't fear. It was habit. I scanned the sender's address, then the timestamp, sent at 6:17 a.m. That struck me as odd, not alarming, just unusual. Most external correspondence related to my work arrived during business hours. I hovered over the attachment name. It was a string of numbers and letters, like a system-generated file ID. No descriptive title. I closed the email. I told myself I'd look at it later. The coffee had finished brewing. I poured a cup, sat back down, and opened the compliance report I'd intended to review. Inventory discrepancies in a Midwest distribution hub. Likely a scanning error. I made a note to follow up. 10 minutes passed. My eyes kept drifting back to the unopened email. Not because I was worried, because I was curious. Curiosity is dangerous when you're someone who believes things make sense if you look long enough. Finally, I clicked the attachment. The document loaded slowly. It was formatted cleanly, professionally. A cover page, a table of contents, footnotes. It looked like something produced by a consulting firm or a legal office. The title didn't mean anything to me at first. What caught my attention was the date in the header. It was 3 years from now. I frowned, assuming it was a template error. Maybe someone forgot to update a field. It happens all the time. I scrolled down. My name appeared again, this time in a section labeled Subject. Below it were references to assets, decisions, and future actions that hadn't occurred yet. Specific ones, precise ones. Still, I didn't panic. I told myself the same thing I tell junior analysts at work. Don't assume intent. Look for context. I closed the document, shut my laptop, and stood up to rinse my coffee mug. The morning sun was coming through the kitchen window at an angle that made dust visible in the air. Everything looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Nothing in the house suggested danger. No noises, no missed calls, no alarms. I grabbed my keys, locked the door behind me, and drove to work like I always did. At stoplights, I reviewed my mental checklist for the day. Meetings, reports, lunch at my desk, call Megan in the evening, maybe. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I had convinced myself the document was a mistake, a misdirected file, someone else's problem. That was the last morning I believed my life was operating on my terms. I just didn't know it yet. By the time I reached my office, the document had settled into the back of my mind, the way an unresolved equation does. Not alarming, just unfinished. The building sits on the edge of an industrial park, gray concrete, tinted windows, a parking lot always half full, no matter the hour. I badged in at 8:02 a.m., nodded at the receptionist, and went straight to my desk. Same cubicle I'd occupied for 9 years. Same framed photo of Laura and me at Hocking Hills, taken before either of us knew what was coming. I logged into our internal system and pulled up the compliance dashboard. Numbers scrolled across the screen, neat columns, predictable variances. I focused on them deliberately, the way you focus on breathing when your thoughts drift somewhere they shouldn't. At 9:15, My supervisor, Tom, stopped by. "Morning, Mark," he said, leaning on the cubicle wall. "You see the inventory flags from Dayton?" "Already reviewing them," I replied. "Looks like a barcode reconciliation issue." Tom smiled. "That's why I like you. Calm. Methodical." He walked away, satisfied. His confidence in me felt reassuring, anchoring. The rest of the morning passed without incident. Emails answered, a short call with an auditor, lunch eaten at my desk, turkey sandwich, apple, bottle of water. I kept my routine intact, as if that alone could prove nothing was wrong. But every time my inbox refreshed, my eyes flicked to the subject lines, half expecting to see another message from that unfamiliar address. Nothing came. At 4:30, I shut down my computer and packed up. The drive home was uneventful. Traffic heavy but moving. Same radio station. Same stretch of road where the billboard advertises personal injury lawyers with too many exclamation points. When I pulled into my driveway, Megan's car wasn't there. That was normal. She usually came on Sundays, sometimes Wednesdays if she was already in the area. Inside, the house was quiet. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, took off my shoes, and loosened my tie. Habit again. I reheated leftover pasta and ate standing at the counter. I didn't open my laptop after dinner. Instead, I turned on the television and watched a documentary I'd already seen once before. I couldn't tell you what it was about. My attention drifted, pulled back again and again to the memory of that date in the header. 3 years ahead. Too specific to be random. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. Megan. "Hey," she said. "Just checking in. How was your day?" "Fine," I replied. "Same as usual." She paused, just long enough for me to notice. "You sound tired." "Long day." "Well, don't forget, I forwarded the trust summary earlier. Nothing urgent, just for your records." "I'll look at it," I said. "You always say that," she laughed lightly. "But seriously, everything's in good shape." "I know," I replied. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the darkened window above the sink. Megan's voice had been normal, friendly, efficient. Still, something about the timing bothered me. I couldn't articulate why. I went upstairs, changed into sweatpants, and finally opened my laptop. Megan's email sat unread. The subject line read, Q3 Trust Overview. I clicked it open. Attached was a PDF, similar in formatting to the one I'd received that morning, clean layout, professional language, charts, tables, footnotes. The numbers aligned with what I expected: disbursements, management fees, projected growth. I scanned it quickly, then more carefully. Everything added up. That should have been the end of it. Instead, I found myself comparing it side by side in my head with the document from that morning. Same font family, same margin spacing, even the same style of page numbering. That didn't mean anything on its own. Plenty of firms use similar templates. Still, I downloaded Megan's attachment and saved it to my desktop. Then, I reopened the earlier document from the unknown sender. I scrolled slowly this time, not reading every word, just observing structure, section headers, bullet styles, citation formatting. They matched. My pulse quickened, not racing, just noticeable, like the first sign of exertion when you climb stairs faster than usual. I told myself it was coincidence. I closed both documents and shut the laptop again, more firmly this time. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed listening to the house settle, the distant sound of a car passing, the refrigerator cycling on and off. My thoughts looped back to the same question. Who sends a document dated 3 years into the future? At 2:13 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. The kitchen clock glowed softly. I poured a glass of water and sat at the table, the same one Megan insisted on cleaning every time she visited, even though it was already clean. I opened my laptop again. This time, I didn't start with the document. I opened my email settings and searched for the sender's domain. Nothing else came up. No history. No forwarded messages. It was the only email I'd ever received from that address. I copied the domain name and pasted it into a browser. No website. No company page. just a blank result. That should have unsettled me more than it did. Instead, I felt oddly calm, focused. I reopened the document and read the first section carefully. It wasn't written like speculation. There was no conditional language, no may or could. It read as if decisions had already been made, actions already taken. My actions, except they weren't mine. The document referenced a series of approvals and authorizations tied to accounts I recognized, accounts I'd never personally managed, but ones connected to my name through inheritance, marital property, and trusts. It wasn't accusing me of anything. It wasn't threatening. It was documenting me. I checked the metadata. The file had been created months ago. I sat back, the chair creaking under my weight. If this was a mistake, it was a sophisticated one. Too much effort for a prank. Too detailed to be random. I thought about calling Megan, waking her up, asking if she knew anything about it. I didn't, not because I suspected her, because I didn't want to sound paranoid. Instead, I did what I've always done when something doesn't make sense. I started keeping notes. I opened a blank document and typed the date at the top. I described the email, the attachment, the future date. I included the exact time it arrived. I pasted in the sender's address. Then I saved it, closed the laptop, and finally went back upstairs. The next day passed, much like the one before. No new emails, no calls. Megan sent a quick text reminding me about Sunday lunch. Saturday morning arrived with rain. I spent the early hours cleaning the garage, organizing tools I hadn't used in years. Physical tasks helped me think. While sorting through a box of old paperwork, I came across a folder labeled Estate, Mom. Inside were copies of documents Megan had handled on my behalf. Signatures, dates, authorization forms. All legitimate, all familiar. But as I flipped through them, something small caught my eye. A notary stamp. The date was correct. The signature was mine. The location, however, was listed as a city I hadn't been in that week. I stared at it for a long moment. Not long enough to panic, just long enough to feel the ground shift slightly under my feet. I closed the folder, put it back in the box, and slid the box onto the shelf. The rain continued outside, steady and quiet. Nothing had happened yet. No confrontation. No accusation. But the sense of ease I'd built my life around, the belief that things were stable because I'd earned stability, had begun to crack. I could feel it, and for the first time in years, I wasn't sure whether staying quiet was still the right thing to do. Sunday arrived without ceremony. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving the air crisp and cool, the kind of early fall morning Columbus does well. I woke at 6:40 a.m., later than usual, and lay in bed listening to the quiet. No traffic yet, no neighbors mowing lawns, just the low hum of the furnace kicking on. For a moment, I considered canceling lunch with Megan. Not because I suspected her of anything specific. That would have required a leap I wasn't ready to make. I told myself I simply needed a quiet day, time to think, time to let the unease fade. But avoiding routine would only make the feeling louder. So I got up. By 9:30, I'd showered, shaved, and changed the sheets. Another habit cleaning when my thoughts became restless. The house smelled faintly of detergent and coffee by the time I finished brewing a fresh pot. Megan arrived at exactly 12:03 p.m. I noticed the time because I was standing at the kitchen counter, pouring the coffee, when her car pulled into the driveway. A silver sedan, recently washed, parked with its tires aligned perfectly with the concrete seam. She's always been precise that way. She let herself in, as she always does. Keys jingling briefly before the door opened. "Hey," she said, cheerful, carrying 2 grocery bags. "I brought soup ingredients. Thought we'd keep it light." "Sounds good," I replied. She moved through the kitchen comfortably, setting bags on the counter, pulling out vegetables, setting them aside in neat piles. Onions, carrots, celery. Her movements were efficient, almost automatic. We talked about nothing important at first. Her week, a client dispute, a friend who was moving to Denver. I listened, nodded, offered neutral responses. She didn't mention the trust. I didn't mention the document. The soup simmered while she chopped vegetables, the steady rhythm of the knife against the cutting board filling the spaces between conversation. The normalcy of it all was almost convincing. Halfway through lunch, Megan excused herself to use the restroom. I stood at the sink, rinsing my bowl, watching her reflection disappear down the hallway. When I turned back to the counter, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at the screen for a second longer than usual before answering. Hello? There was a pause. Then a man's voice. Calm. Professional. Is this Mark Henson? Yes. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm calling from a third-party risk assessment firm. This call may have been misdirected, but I wanted to confirm whether you're the correct point of contact for an upcoming review. My stomach tightened slightly. What kind of review? I asked. There was another pause. Papers shifting on the other end. Asset governance, he said. Specifically, future state authorization planning. Future state. The phrase hit me harder than I expected. I think you have the wrong number, I said carefully. That's possible, Daniel replied. Before I hang up, can I just confirm, are you associated with the Henson Family Trust? I didn't answer immediately. Yes, I said finally. But I don't handle administration. Understood, he said. In that case, I apologize for the interruption. You shouldn't have received that call yet. It was so yet. The line went dead. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall above the sink. The ticking of the kitchen clock suddenly felt louder than it should have been. Megan returned a moment later, drying her hands on a towel. Everything okay? She asked. Wrong number, I said. She nodded, unconcerned, and went back to the stove. We finished lunch without incident. Megan packed up leftovers, wiped down the counter, and reminded me she'd be busy the following weekend. I'll send you the updated projections once I hear back from the administrator, she said casually, slipping on her coat. Okay, I replied. After she left, the house felt different. Not quieter, just thinner, like a layer had been peeled away. I replayed the phone call in my head. The phrasing, the assumption that I would eventually be involved. The word yet. That afternoon, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't read. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the document again. This time, I didn't skim. I read it, line by line. The language was clinical, detached. It outlined a timeline, milestones marked not by dates on a calendar, but by conditions being met, approvals obtained, roles transferred, oversight adjusted. My name appeared repeatedly, always in the passive voice. Upon determination, following subject capacity review. Pending confirmation of compliance. Capacity. That word appeared 3 times. I searched for it within the document. Each instance referenced evaluations, assessments, and third-party confirmations. I closed the file and opened the trust summary Megan had sent. Then I opened my notes. The pattern began to emerge slowly, reluctantly, like an image developing in a dark room. The document wasn't predicting the future. It was planning for it, and it assumed my participation would be unnecessary. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. If this was a misunderstanding, it was one that involved multiple entities, consultants, administrators, assessors, all operating on information I hadn't provided. The only person consistently positioned between me and those systems was Megan. That realization didn't come with anger or fear. It came with a dull pressure behind my eyes. I told myself again that there must be an explanation, a reasonable one. Megan was efficient, proactive. Maybe she'd initiated preliminary planning as a precaution. Maybe she'd misunderstood the scope, but that didn't explain the future date, or the call, or the notary stamp. I checked my calendar. 3 weeks earlier, Megan had insisted I sign a stack of documents during one of her visits. Just housekeeping, she'd said. Nothing urgent. I'd trusted her. Signed where she indicated. I hadn't read every page. I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled MISC. His act. Inside were copies of those documents. I spread them across the desk. Most were straightforward. A few pages in, I found one that referenced authorization contingent upon evaluation. I hadn't noticed it before. The language was buried, technical, easy to gloss over. My signature sat at the bottom. My chest tightened. Not panic. Recognition. I wasn't reacting to a threat. I was recognizing a process already in motion. The inciting moment wasn't the document or the call. It was the understanding that my silence, my preference for stability, my trust in routine had been interpreted as consent. I closed the folder carefully, as if it might shatter if handled too roughly. Outside, the afternoon light was fading. I didn't confront Megan. I didn't call Daniel Reeves back. I didn't alert anyone. Instead, I did something that felt small at the time, almost insignificant. I began organizing my records, every document, every email, every signature. I wasn't planning a fight. I was preparing to understand exactly what kind of game I was already playing, and whether I still had a seat at the table. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not because I was afraid of being wrong, but because I needed the quiet. Silence had always helped me see patterns. Conversations blurred them. Monday morning, I called in sick for the first time in nearly 3 years. I didn't say why. I didn't need to. My supervisor accepted it without comment, and that, in itself, reinforced how invisible I'd become in my own life. Reliable people don't raise questions. They're assumed to be fine. By Osham, 0 a.m. I was back at my desk at home. Legal pad open, laptop charged, phone face down. The house felt different during weekday hours, emptier, more exposed. Outside, neighbors came and went, engines starting, garage doors lifting. Everyone else was moving forward while I stayed still. I started with the simplest thing, email. I searched my inbox for Megan's name, then filtered by attachments. Hundreds of messages surfaced, spanning years. I sorted them chronologically and began opening them one by one, not reading the content at first, just observing patterns. She sent documents in clusters, never one at a time, always grouped, always prefaced with phrases like, "just for your records," or "nothing urgent." She rarely followed up. That struck me as odd. Megan followed up on everything else in her life. Next, I opened my bank statements, downloaded the last 5 years' worth, and created a separate folder. I didn't look for missing money. I looked for consistency. Recurring transfers, same amounts, same dates, small sums, moved regularly, always labeled in a way that implied administrative necessity, management fees, processing adjustments, external services. They'd never bothered me before. They weren't large enough to trigger concern. But when I aligned them with the dates on the trust summaries Megan sent, the correlation was exact. Every quarter, like clockwork. I wrote the dates down, then I cross-referenced them with my calendar. Meetings I hadn't attended, appointments I didn't remember scheduling, days when Megan had insisted on stopping by, briefly, to take care of paperwork. Nothing illegal jumped out. No single moment screamed misconduct. What emerged instead was something quieter. Coordination. Late that morning, I pulled up public records, deeds, filings, probate documents. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. A form filed with the county clerk 18 months earlier, related to my mother's estate. It listed me as present at a hearing I had not attended. The signature wasn't forged. It was mine. The location, again, didn't match. I sat back and rubbed my eyes, the beginnings of a headache forming. This wasn't theft. It wasn't impersonation. It was representation. Someone had been acting on my behalf in spaces I didn't know existed. I checked the filing agent's name. Then I searched it. A consulting firm, mid-sized, specialized in estate transition planning and long-term asset governance. Their website used reassuring language, words like stability, continuity, and future-proofing. The phrase future state authorization appeared again. I closed the browser. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Megan. "Just checking in? Hope you're feeling better?" I stared at it for a moment before replying. "All good. Just taking a quiet day." "Good," she responded. "Don't forget to review the updated documents when you get a chance." Updated, plural. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the document from the unknown sender again and began examining the references section. Each citation pointed to reports, evaluations, and third-party assessments. Some were redacted. Others listed firm names and dates. I copied them into my notes. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called someone without an agenda. The number belonged to a former colleague named Alan, who'd left our company 2 years earlier to work in risk auditing. We hadn't spoken since his departure. "Mark," he said, surprised but friendly. "This is unexpected. Can I ask you a hypothetical question?" I said. "Sure. If someone wanted to restructure oversight of an individual's assets without triggering resistance, how would they do it?" There was a pause. "They'd make it incremental," Alan said slowly. "Normalize it. Spread authority across entities. Avoid confrontation." "Why?" "No reason," I replied. "Just curious." "Well," he continued, "they'd probably frame it as protective, capacity planning, risk mitigation. Hard to argue against that without sounding defensive. Would it require consent? Eventually, he said, but consent can be procedural, buried in routine. I thanked him and hung up. By mid-afternoon, I had a timeline, not of crimes, of decisions. Each small, each reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a structure I'd never approved, but had technically allowed. The most unsettling part wasn't the discovery itself. It was how calm I felt while discovering it. This wasn't a betrayal that happened overnight. It was a slow redirection, a gradual narrowing of options, a quiet reassignment of authority. I checked my medical records next. That felt intrusive, even to myself. There it was, an entry from a routine physical 2 years earlier. Notes about stress levels, sleep quality, cognitive focus. Nothing alarming, nothing diagnostic, but attached was a referral note, a suggestion for baseline cognitive assessment for future planning. I'd never followed up on it. The referral had been initiated by Megan. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. This was the first time fear crept in, not sharp, not panicked, but cold and precise. Someone had begun documenting me as a variable, not incompetent, not unwell, just manageable. I closed my laptop and stood up, pacing the room. The house felt smaller now, like it was closing in. Every familiar object seemed to carry new weight. The couch where Megan sat, the chair where she'd slid documents across the table, the pen I always used to sign. None of it had felt dangerous at the time. Late in the afternoon, I did one last thing. I opened a new folder on an external hard drive and labeled it simply Records. Then I began copying everything into it. Emails, PDFs, statements, filings. I wasn't building a case. I was reclaiming visibility. When evening came, I didn't cook. I didn't turn on the TV. I sat at the kitchen table, lights off, the glow from the street lamp filtering through the window. Megan called again around 7:30. I let it ring, not to punish her, not to provoke. I needed to know how it felt to not respond. The voicemail was brief, casual. "Hey, just wanted to make sure you're okay. Call me when you get this." And was. I didn't. That night, as I lay in bed, the realization settled fully. The harm, whatever it was, wasn't about money. It was about narrative. Someone else had been quietly rewriting mine. And now that I could see it, I knew something else just as clearly. If I confronted it too early, I'd lose what little leverage I had left. So I stayed quiet, and I watched. The hardest part wasn't realizing that something was being done to me. It was realizing that whoever was doing it probably believed they were right. That thought arrived quietly, sometime early Tuesday morning, while I stood at the kitchen counter stirring oatmeal I didn't want to eat. The radio murmured in the background traffic updates, a weather forecast I wouldn't need since I wasn't going anywhere. Outside, a delivery truck stopped at my neighbor's house, engine idling, hazard lights blinking steadily. Everything about the morning was ordinary, and that was the problem. If this had been obvious cruelty, or greed, or malice, my response would have been simple. Anger would have given me direction. Fear would have given me urgency. Even betrayal would have been easier to process if it came wrapped in clear intent. But what I was seeing didn't look like that. It looked like planning, responsible planning. I spent the morning rereading the documents I'd collected, not with the eye of someone searching for wrongdoing, but with the mindset of someone trying to understand justification. I read the language carefully, paying attention not to what it accused me of, but to what it assumed. The assumption was not that I was incapable. It was that I was vulnerable, widowed, childless, routine-driven, financially stable but socially isolated. A profile that, in certain professional circles, didn't signal independence, it signaled exposure. Every recommendation, every referral, every layered authorization followed a logic that was disturbingly coherent. Reduce risk, ensure continuity, prepare for contingencies. None of those goals were inherently wrong. The discomfort came from the method. I hadn't been invited into the conversation. I'd been documented as an outcome. Around 10 a.m., I drove to a coffee shop near downtown, one I hadn't visited in years. I needed to be somewhere public, somewhere anonymous. The house had begun to feel like a controlled environment, even though I knew that was an exaggeration. The shop was half full. Students with laptops, a couple of retirees reading newspapers, a woman arguing quietly on her phone near the window. I ordered black coffee and sat at a small table near the back, my laptop open but untouched. I watched people come and go and tried to imagine how my situation would look from the outside. A man nearing 50, no spouse, no children, assets inherited through marriage and family, a sister who was capable, organized, deeply involved. If someone told me this story professionally, stripped of emotion, I might nod along. I might even agree with certain precautions. That realization made my chest tighten, because it meant that confronting Megan or anyone else involved wouldn't be simple. I couldn't just accuse her of manipulation or control without also accusing her of concern. And concern is difficult to argue against. My phone buzzed on the table. Another text from Megan. Just left a meeting with the administrator. All good on their end. No action needed from you today. I stared at the message longer than necessary. No action needed. That phrase appeared everywhere in my records. In emails, in reports, in footnotes. It was the language of exclusion disguised as reassurance. I typed a response, then deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Instead, I put the phone face down and closed my eyes. I thought about Laura. She'd been the one who encouraged me to loosen my grip on structure, to let people help, to trust that not everything needed my direct oversight. Delegating isn't weakness, she used to say. It's survival. She'd trusted Megan too. That memory cut deeper than any document I'd read. If I escalated this, if I exposed the process, challenged the authority being built around me, I wouldn't just be challenging Megan. I'd be challenging a network of professionals who believed they were acting ethically. I'd also be calling my own judgment into question. Why hadn't I noticed sooner? Why had I signed without reading? Why had I allowed routines to replace vigilance? Those questions wouldn't just be asked by others. They'd be asked by me. By early afternoon, I realized I was circling the same thought from different angles, avoiding the center. The center was this. Stopping what was happening might hurt people who weren't trying to hurt me. It might destabilize systems that were already in motion. It might expose intentions that, while misguided, weren't malicious. And it might cost Megan more than she expected. I didn't know if she was acting alone or following advice. I didn't know how much she believed in what she was doing, or whether she saw it as temporary, preventative. All I knew was that I didn't want to destroy her life to reclaim mine. That was the moral misalignment I couldn't escape. The process treated me as an object to be managed. But the people involved were not villains in their own minds. Late that afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I scheduled an appointment, not with a lawyer, not with an investigator, with my primary care physician, the same one I'd seen for years, the one whose notes appeared in the referral I'd discovered. The appointment was for the following week. I told myself it was practical. If my capacity was being quietly questioned, then establishing clarity on my own terms was necessary. But it was also something else. It was a way to step into the narrative rather than fighting it from the outside. When I got home, I opened my filing cabinet again and pulled out the documents Megan had brought over 3 weeks earlier. I read them slowly this time, fully. There it was, buried in the language. Authorization contingent upon assessment. Assessment contingent upon observed indicators. Indicators defined broadly enough to encompass nearly anything. Stress, isolation, decision fatigue. All human, all normal, all exploitable. I closed the folder and placed it back where I'd found it. That evening, Megan called again. I answered. "Hey," she said, relief evident in her voice. I was starting to worry. "I've just been laying low," I replied. "Probably good," she said. "You've had a lot on your plate lately." Her tone was gentle, supportive, not manipulative, not cold. "Yeah," I said. "I've been thinking about the future." She laughed softly. "That's my line." "I know," I said. "Listen, I might schedule a few appointments, just to get everything documented. Clean slate." There was a brief pause. "That's actually a great idea," she said. "Proactive." Proactive. The word landed heavily. "Thought so," I replied. We talked for a few more minutes about mundane things. The weather, her upcoming travel, a recipe she wanted to try. When we hung up, I sat in the darkened living room, the phone still warm in my hand. The truth had become unavoidable. If I acted too aggressively, I'd validate every assumption being made about me. If I did nothing, I'd eventually be sidelined entirely. The only viable path was one that felt deeply uncomfortable. I would have to play along, not because I agreed, but because I needed to understand the full scope of what was being built and decide, later, how much of it deserved to stand. For now, the most dangerous move would be to appear threatened. So I did what I'd always done when faced with a system I didn't yet understand. I complied, quietly, and I paid very close attention. The appointment with my doctor was scheduled for the following Thursday at 10:30 a.m. I didn't tell Megan about it. Not because I wanted to hide anything, but because I wanted to see what happened when I moved without informing the system that had quietly formed around me. Even small deviations can reveal a lot. The clinic was 15 minutes from my house, tucked behind a row of office buildings and a dry cleaner. I'd been there dozens of times, before annual physicals, flu shots, routine blood work, familiar territory. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old magazines. A television mounted in the corner played a muted morning show. Two other patients sat spaced far apart, both scrolling on their phones. When the nurse called my name, she smiled the way people do when they recognize someone who's never caused trouble. "Good to see you again, Mark," she said, leading me down the hall. Vitals first. Everything was normal. Blood pressure slightly elevated, which she attributed to stress. Weight unchanged, pulse steady. "Doctor will be with you shortly," she said, tapping notes into a tablet before leaving the room. I sat on the paper-covered exam table and waited. Dr. Patel entered a minute later, tablet in hand, glasses perched low on his nose. He'd been my physician for nearly a decade. Calm, methodical, not prone to dramatics. "Good morning," he said. "What brings you in today?" "I wanted to follow up on something," I replied. I noticed a referral note in my records from a couple of years ago, about a baseline cognitive assessment. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember that. I never requested it," I said, "and I never followed through." "No," he said. "It was suggested by a family member." "Megan?" I said. "Yes." I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of discomfort or defensiveness. There was none. "She expressed concern," he continued. "Given your circumstances at the time bereavement, increased stress, it wasn't unreasonable." "I understand that," I said. "What I'm trying to understand is whether there was anything in my presentation that warranted concern." He scrolled through my chart. "No," he said plainly. "Your cognitive screening was normal. Still is, as far as I can tell." "Then why document it?" I asked. "Because documentation is how we protect patients," he replied. "And sometimes families." There it was again, protection. "Did you ever speak to anyone else about it?" I asked. "Any third parties?" He hesitated, just briefly. "There was a request for general information," he said. "Nothing specific, no diagnoses, just what baseline assessments typically involve." "From whom?" He looked up at me, measuring his response. "A consulting group," he said. "They handle long-term planning. I don't recall the name." That was enough. I thanked him, declined further testing, and left. In the parking lot, I sat in my car longer than necessary, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The sky was overcast, low clouds pressing down on the city. Dr. Patel hadn't been part of anything malicious. He'd done what doctors do, responded to concerns, documented responsibly, avoided overreach. The system wasn't built by villains. It was built by professionals doing their jobs. That realization solidified something for me. This wasn't a conspiracy. It was an ecosystem. And ecosystems don't collapse because of one weak link. They shift when incentives change. On the drive home, I didn't take my usual route. I turned toward downtown instead, following an impulse I couldn't fully explain. I parked near a small office building and sat for a moment, staring at the directory in the lobby. I was looking for a name. I found it. Daniel Reeves. The consulting firm listed matched the domain from the email I'd received. Same logo, same language. Future-ready asset governance. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat on a bench outside the building and watched people come and go. Most looked like consultants, well-dressed, purposeful, phones pressed to their ears. Normal professionals moving through a normal workday. After 20 minutes, a man stepped out who matched the voice I remembered from the phone call. Mid-40s, neatly trimmed beard, leather briefcase worn just enough to suggest experience. He didn't notice me. I wasn't there to confront him, or even to speak to him. I just needed to see him exist, to remind myself that the process shaping my life was being driven by people who went home at night believing they'd done something reasonable. That afternoon, I made another call. This one was to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Karen Liu. She'd worked in internal audit at my company before transferring to a regulatory compliance role at a hospital network. Smart, direct, unimpressed by titles. "Mark Henson," she said when she answered. "This is unexpected. I need your opinion on something," I said. Not professionally, just logically. I explained the situation without naming Megan, without framing myself as a victim. I focused on the structure, the layering, the documentation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "This sounds familiar," she said. "In what way?" "I've seen it with elderly patients," she said, "and with executives nearing retirement. It's not illegal. It's not even unethical, strictly speaking. But it's dangerous because once the process starts, it becomes self-justifying," she said. "Every step taken is used as evidence that the step was necessary. Is there a way out?" "There's always a way," she said. "But you don't blow it up from the outside. You'd be labeled unstable, defensive. So what do? You stay inside," she said, "and you make yourself indispensable." The words settled heavily. Indispensable. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and reviewed my notes again. I wasn't angry. I wasn't panicked. I was focused. The catalyst hadn't been a document, or a call, or a notary stamp. It had been the realization that the system assessing me didn't actually know me. It knew data points, patterns, risks. It didn't know intent. And intent was the one variable I still controlled. That evening, Megan stopped by unexpectedly. "I was in the area," she said, stepping inside. "Thought I'd check on you. Everything okay?" I asked. "Of course," she said. "Just wanted to make sure you weren't isolating too much." She glanced around the house, taking in the familiar space. Her gaze lingered on my desk, where papers were stacked neatly, but differently than before. "You reorganizing?" she asked. "Just catching up," I said. She smiled. "That's good. You've always been good at that." We talked for a few minutes, about nothing important. As she left, she paused at the door. "Hey," she said, "if anyone reaches out to you about planning or assessments or anything like that, just loop me in. It's easier when we're aligned." "Aligned? I will," I said. After she drove away, I stood in the doorway and watched her taillights disappear down the street. The picture was clear now. This wasn't about taking something from me. It was about deciding for me. And the only way to interrupt that decision wasn't with confrontation or outrage. It was with clarity, the kind that forces systems to adapt. I returned to my desk, opened my notes, and added a new line at the top. Objective: remain underestimated. Then I kept working. Once you understand that a system exists, the next question isn't who built it. It's what it's actually protecting That question followed me for days, quiet but persistent, like a low-frequency hum you only notice when everything else goes still. I stopped looking for smoking guns. I stopped rereading documents for signs of malice. Instead, I shifted focus. I asked myself a simpler question. If this wasn't about money, if the numbers were too small, too evenly distributed to justify the effort, then what justified it? The answer didn't come all at once. It came in fragments. It came when I reviewed my work calendar and noticed how often I'd been encouraged to take time off during key reporting cycles. It came when I reread old emails where Megan suggested I let her handle conversations with lawyers, administrators, and consultants. It came when I noticed that every system in motion had one thing in common. They didn't just manage assets, they managed decisions, not ownership, not access. Authority. Once I saw that, everything aligned. The future-dated document wasn't forecasting my decline. It was anticipating my absence from rooms where decisions were made, from conversations where intent mattered, from the ability to say no before no longer mattered. The system didn't need me gone. It just needed me quiet. I spent an entire Saturday reconstructing one specific thread, not financial, procedural. I tracked how communication flowed, who spoke to whom, and who didn't need to be included. In every case, Megan sat at the center, not as a controller, but as a translator. She filtered complexity, simplified explanations, reduced friction. To everyone else, she was helpful. To me, she was reassuring. To the system, she was efficient. That was the real danger. Efficiency hides intent better than secrecy ever could. I remembered a conversation from months earlier, one I hadn't thought twice about at the time. Megan had mentioned a potential job opportunity for me consulting work, remote, less demanding. "You've earned a slower pace," she'd said. "You don't need to be in the weeds anymore." I'd laughed it off, declined politely. At the time, it sounded like care. Now, it sounded like positioning. That night, I pulled out a notebook, an actual notebook, not a digital file, and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. What happens if I stop deciding? The answer came quickly. Others would decide for me, not out of cruelty. Out of convenience? The system had been built to ensure continuity, not autonomy. And I was the variable that threatened continuity by insisting on context, nuance, and consent. I thought back to my work how often compliance failures weren't caused by bad actors, but by assumptions. Someone decided they understood the risk well enough to move forward without full visibility. That was what was happening to me. I wasn't being stolen from. I was being abstracted, reduced to a profile, a risk category, a future inconvenience. That understanding shifted something fundamental inside me. I stopped feeling defensive. Instead, I felt clear. Because once you know the real target isn't your assets, but your voice, the strategy changes entirely. I didn't need to expose the system. I needed to disrupt its premise. On Monday morning, I returned to work. Not because I had to, but because visibility matters. I showed up early, answered emails promptly, volunteered for a cross-department review no one else wanted, spoke up in meetings, calmly, precisely, with just enough insight to remind people I was present. At lunch, I scheduled 3 follow-up appointments I'd been postponing. Not medical, not legal, but professional. A continuing education seminar, a compliance roundtable, a certification renewal. Nothing dramatic, just undeniable markers of engagement. That afternoon, I received an email from the consulting firm. This time, it wasn't a mistake. It was polite, neutral, carefully worded. They requested a brief introductory call to ensure alignment moving forward. Alignment again. I forwarded the email to Megan without comment. She called me within minutes. "That's great," she said. "They're probably just formalizing things." "I figured," I replied. "You want me to join the call?" she asked. I paused. Just long enough. "Not this one," I said. "I'd like to hear what they have to say directly." Silence. Then, "Of course, that makes sense." Her voice didn't change, but something underneath it did. That evening, I prepared. Not notes. Questions. On the day of the call, I dressed as if I were going to the office, even though I was sitting in my home study. I positioned the camera carefully. Neutral background. Good lighting. Daniel Reeves appeared on the screen, composed and professional. "Thank you for taking the time," he said. "This is just an introductory conversation." "I understand," I replied. He spoke about risk management, continuity planning, and long-term stability. I listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. Then I asked my questions. Not accusatory ones, clarifying ones. What assumptions are being made about my future availability? What data points were used to initiate this process? At what stage is direct consent required? Each question was reasonable. Each answer revealed something. By the end of the call, I understood exactly what had been built, and Daniel understood something too. I wasn't confused. I wasn't resistant. I was present. After we ended the call, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something colder, steadier. The system hadn't misjudged my finances. It had misjudged my willingness to disengage. That night, Megan came over again. She didn't mention the call. We sat at the kitchen island, drinking tea. She talked about her week. I listened. At one point, she said, "You know, not everyone wants to carry the weight you do. It's okay to let go sometimes." I met her eyes. "Letting go is a choice," I said, "not a transition." She held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then smiled. "Of course." After she left, I returned to my notebook and added another line beneath the first. "They don't want what I have. They want what I decide." That was the true target. And now that I knew it, I could finally plan my next move. Not to reclaim control, but to redefine what control looked like in a system that underestimated quiet resistance. The game wasn't about stopping the process. It was about forcing it to recognize me as an active variable again, and I was ready to do exactly that. The instinct to confront is hardwired. When you realize someone has been shaping your life without your consent, every part of you wants to drag it into the light, demand explanations, force accountability. I felt that instinct rise more than once. It showed up late at night, when the house was quiet and my thoughts had too much room to move. It surfaced when Megan used words like aligned and protective, when consultants spoke as if my future were a shared project rather than a personal one. But instinct isn't strategy, and confrontation, I knew, would give the system exactly what it needed: a reaction. I didn't arrive at that conclusion all at once. It took a few days of sitting with the discomfort, letting it settle into something more manageable than anger. I watched my own impulses carefully, the same way I'd learned to watch processes at work, observe, without intervening too early. The truth was simple and unpleasant. If I confronted anyone directly, I would be framed as emotional, defensive, uncooperative. The very labels that justified the quiet planning would suddenly feel earned. So I made a decision that went against every reflex I had. I would not confront Megan. I would not challenge the consultants. I would not expose the structure being built around me. Instead, I would behave as if I didn't fully see it. That didn't mean pretending nothing was happening. It meant choosing where my attention showed. The first step was small. I stopped correcting language. When Megan said, "We should think about," I didn't say, "I'll decide." I nodded. When emails referenced future planning, I responded with neutral acknowledgments, short replies, no objections, no enthusiasm either. At work, I did something similar. I avoided unnecessary debates. I agreed to timelines I knew were reasonable. I documented everything quietly, thoroughly, without flagging concerns prematurely. I wasn't retreating. I was lowering my profile. Lowering your profile doesn't mean becoming invisible. It means becoming predictable. And predictability makes people careless. That week, Megan suggested we have dinner out, something we rarely did. "There's a place downtown I've been wanting to try," she said. "Thought it might be nice to get out of the house." I agreed without hesitation. The restaurant was modern, dimly lit, the kind of place where conversations blend into a low hum. We were seated at a small table near the back. Megan ordered a glass of wine. I ordered water. We talked about neutral things: her clients, a project deadline, a mutual friend's engagement. At one point, she leaned back slightly and said, "You've seemed calmer lately." "I've had time to think," I replied. She smiled. That's good. There was something in the way she said it, relief, maybe, or reassurance. I let it stand. On the drive home, I realized how closely she'd been watching me. Not suspiciously, attentively, like someone monitoring a process to ensure it stays within acceptable parameters. That wasn't villainy. It was management. Understanding that distinction helped me detach emotionally. This wasn't personal in the way betrayal usually is. It was procedural, and procedures can be influenced. Over the next 2 weeks, I made a series of quiet adjustments. I began sharing selectively. Not lies, just partial truths. I mentioned work stress without elaborating. I talked about plans without timelines. I answered questions without volunteering context. At the same time, I increased my activity in places the system valued. I attended the professional seminar I'd registered for, posted a short update on LinkedIn about compliance trends, responded promptly to consultant emails with thoughtful, concise responses. I was signaling engagement without resistance. From the outside, I looked like someone easing into the process, not pushing against it. Internally, I was doing something else entirely. I was mapping dependencies. I noted who deferred to who waited for Megan's input before proceeding, which decisions required my signature and which had been rerouted around it. The picture became clearer. The system assumed I would eventually disengage. It was built to absorb that disengagement smoothly. My job wasn't to stop it outright. It was to delay it just enough to introduce uncertainty. One afternoon, I received a calendar invite for a review session scheduled 6 weeks out. No agenda attached, just a time, a list of attendees, and a vague description. I accepted it immediately. Then I did something subtle. I forwarded the invite to a colleague at work, someone respected, experienced, and entirely unrelated to my personal affairs. I asked if they'd be available to consult informally on a governance discussion. No details, no drama. They agreed. The next day, Megan called. "I saw the calendar update," she said. "That review session, it's mostly procedural." "Good," I replied. "I like procedures." She laughed. "I know you do. By the way," I added casually, "I might have a colleague sit in, just to help me understand the framework." There was a pause. "Oh," she said, "is that necessary?" "Probably not," I said, "but it helps me focus." Another pause. "Well," she said carefully, "as long as it doesn't complicate things." "It won't," I replied. "I'll make sure of that." That night, I wrote in my notebook again. They fear complications more than resistance. That insight changed everything. The system thrived on smooth transitions, clean handoffs, minimal friction. Anything that introduced complexity, even benign complexity, forced reevaluation. So I introduced complexity, not by refusing, by asking thoughtful questions at inconvenient times, by involving neutral third parties under the guise of clarity, by remaining calm, agreeable, and present. Weeks passed. Nothing exploded. No accusations. No dramatic shifts. But the tone changed. Emails became more detailed. Calls included more stakeholders. Megan checked in more often, her questions slightly more specific. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked one evening. "Fine," I said. "I like understanding how things work." She nodded, but her eyes searched my face longer than usual. I realized then that confrontation would have ended this quickly, but at a cost I wasn't willing to pay. It would have burned bridges, hardened positions, turned concern into defense. By choosing not to confront, I'd done something counterintuitive. I'd made space. Space for mistakes. Space for assumptions to surface. Space for the system to reveal where it was weakest. I wasn't waiting for a confession. I was waiting for overconfidence. And overconfidence, I knew, always comes when people believe the hardest part is already behind them. From the outside, I looked cooperative. From the inside, I was preparing to shift the balance without ever raising my voice. The decision not to confront wasn't about patience. It was about timing. And timing, in systems like this, is everything. The mistake most people make when they think they're being managed is assuming the management is centralized. It rarely is. By the time I reached what I privately called my counterphase, I understood that no single person was in control. Not Megan, not Daniel Reeves, not the administrators or consultants. Control was distributed. Each participant held just enough responsibility to feel justified and just little enough to feel insulated. That was the system's strength. It was also its weakness. You can't topple something like that head on, but you can change the way it balances. I didn't announce a counterattack. I didn't even plan one in the traditional sense. Instead, I introduced a variable so small it looked like noise. It began with a document, not a dramatic one, not legal or medical, just a professional update 1 page, carefully written, outlining my continued role at work, recent certifications, and upcoming projects. I included timelines, names, metrics. Then I did something very specific. I sent it to Daniel Reeves, not to Megan. The email was brief. Thought this might be helpful context ahead of the review session. Happy to answer questions. That was it. No defensiveness, no subtext. Just information. Daniel replied within an hour, thanking me and confirming receipt. Then something subtle happened. The next email I received from a different firm involved in the process copied me directly for the first time. Not Megan alone, me. It was a small shift, easy to miss, but it mattered. Information flow had changed. I watched for similar changes over the next few days, and they came. Requests for clarification began coming to me instead of through Megan. Calendars updated with my availability in mind. Language in emails shifted from pending confirmation to pending discussion. I hadn't challenged the process. I'd complicated it. At work, I continued my routine with quiet precision. I volunteered for a compliance audit that required external coordination, another signal of engagement, of relevance. I scheduled meetings weeks out and kept them. At home, I made no changes Megan could easily interpret. Same routines, same demeanor, same willingness to listen, but I stopped deferring. When she offered to handle a conversation, I said, I'll take the first pass. When she suggested consolidating paperwork, I said, let's review it together. Each response was reasonable. Each added friction. The review session arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. It was virtual. 6 participants. Cameras on, neutral backgrounds. Megan joined from her office. Daniel Reeves appeared from a conference room. 2 administrators I recognized from email chains. 1 consultant I didn't. And me. I didn't dominate the conversation. I didn't interrupt. I listened. When asked questions, I answered directly, without elaboration. When explanations were offered, I acknowledged them without endorsement. Then, near the end, I asked one question. It wasn't confrontational. It wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Can someone clarify which assumptions in this plan are contingent on my reduced participation? The room went quiet. Not tense, just recalibrating. Daniel answered carefully. There are no assumptions of reduced participation. It's about preparedness. I understand, I said. Preparedness for what, specifically? Another pause. For potential future constraints, one of the administrators said. And who defines those constraints? I asked. No one answered immediately. Megan glanced at the screen, then back at her camera. Mark, she said gently, this is all very preliminary. I know, I replied. That's why I want clarity now. I wasn't challenging intent. I was challenging ambiguity. The meeting ended shortly after. No conclusions were reached. No decisions finalized. But something important had happened. The system had been forced to articulate itself in my presence. That night, Megan called. You surprised them, she said. That wasn't my intention, I replied. I know, she said. But you've been more involved lately. I've always been involved, I said. Just not always visible. She didn't respond right away. I just don't want this to become stressful for you, she said finally. It's less stressful when I understand what's happening, I replied. She sighed softly. Okay. The call ended without conflict, but the tone had shifted again. Over the next week, I noticed something else. The consultants began to hedge. Emails included more qualifiers. Recommendations were framed as options rather than trajectories. The language softened. I'd introduced uncertainty, not about my capacity, about their assumptions. The quiet counter-move wasn't about exposing anyone. It was about forcing the system to acknowledge that I was still an active decision maker. But there was another layer I hadn't touched yet, the moral one. Because while the system adjusted, Megan remained in the middle, still protective, still efficient, still convinced she was acting responsibly. I didn't want to destroy that belief. I wanted to redirect it. So I made one final adjustment. I asked Megan for help, not in managing me, in managing them. I think some of these consultants are over-engineering things, I said one evening as we sat at the kitchen island. You have better judgment than most of them. She looked surprised, then pleased. You really think so? I do, I said. I trust you. That was true, just not in the way she assumed. From that point on, I positioned her not as my intermediary, but as my advocate, someone whose role was to simplify the system, not expand it. And she stepped into that role eagerly. She pushed back on unnecessary steps, questioned redundant evaluations, delayed timelines. For clarity, she did it to protect me. In doing so, she dismantled the very structure she'd helped build. That was the quiet brilliance of it. I hadn't defeated the system. I'd redirected its most motivated participant. By the end of the month, the review session had been rescheduled. Scope reduced, language revised. The future-dated document was never mentioned again, not because it disappeared, but because it no longer fit the reality unfolding around me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was something closer to relief, tempered by a deeper understanding of how easily concern can turn into control when left unchecked. The counter-move had worked, not by force, but by leverage. And as I sat at my desk one evening, updating my notebook, I added another line beneath the others. Power doesn't always come from stopping a system. Sometimes it comes from teaching it to see you again. The balance had shifted, quietly, exactly the way it needed to. I didn't expect the truth to surface the way it did. If I'm honest, I thought it would come slowly. Another meeting, another document, another subtle recalibration. I believed the system would retreat quietly, saving face, adjusting its language until nothing resembling the original plan remained. That's usually how professional structures unwind. No explosions, no apologies, just silence where momentum used to be. But systems don't only react to resistance. They react to exposure, and exposure doesn't always come from the person being managed. It came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the rescheduled review session was quietly downgraded to a check-in. I was at work, halfway through a compliance audit, when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender wasn't Megan. It wasn't Daniel Reeves. It was someone I didn't recognize at all. The subject line read, "Clarification required, prior authorization." I didn't open it right away, not because I was afraid, but because I'd learned the value of timing. I finished the sentence I was reviewing, added a comment, saved my work. Only then did I click. The email was formal, careful, written by someone trying not to sound alarmed. They were part of a different firm, one that hadn't been involved directly in the planning phase, but had recently been asked to validate assumptions already in place. A late-stage reviewer, that distinction mattered. The message was short. We are conducting a routine internal review and notice discrepancies between documented consent pathways and current participant engagement. Before proceeding further, we require clarification on the origin and scope of prior authorizations associated with your name. Attached was a PDF. I opened it, and there it was. Not the future-dated document. Something older. A summary timeline. It listed milestones I recognized, meetings I'd attended, documents I'd signed, but also included actions I hadn't been present for, calls I hadn't joined, approvals logged without direct confirmation. Next to several entries was a note I hadn't seen before. Proxy acknowledgement accepted. My chest tightened, not sharply, not painfully, but enough to force me to sit back. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an audit, and audits don't care about intentions. They care about alignment. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I forwarded the email to Megan. No commentary, no questions, just the message. She called within minutes. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Just came in," I said. Her breathing was audible on the line, controlled but faster than usual. "This shouldn't have gone to you directly," she said. "I thought you said everything was aligned," I replied gently. "It is," she said quickly. I mean, it was. This is probably just procedural overlap. Fine it. Maybe, I said. They're asking for clarification. I'll handle it, she said. There it was again. The reflex. Let's not, I said calmly. Let's answer it together. Silence. I don't think that's necessary, she said finally. It'll only complicate things. They've already been complicated, I replied. By definition. She exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. Let me see the attachment. That evening, Megan came over. Not unannounced this time. She texted first. Asked if it was a good time. It was. We sat at the kitchen island, the same place where so many documents had changed hands over the past year. The laptop sat open between us, the PDF visible on the screen. She read silently, her face composed but tight. When she finished, she closed the laptop and folded her hands. This isn't what it looks like, she said. I haven't said what it looks like, I replied. She nodded. Fair. She looked down at the countertop, then back at me. I was trying to prevent something worse, she said. What? I asked. She hesitated. Chaos, she said. Uncertainty. You withdrawing without realizing it. People taking advantage of gaps. I waited. When Mom died, she continued, you shut down. You didn't notice how much I was handling because you didn't want to. I thought if I didn't step in fully, no one would. I didn't ask you to step in like this, I said. No, she admitted. You didn't. Her voice wavered, just slightly. But you didn't stop me either. That landed heavier than any accusation. She wasn't wrong. I thought I was helping, she said. Everyone I talked to agreed it was responsible. They said it was better to plan early than to react later. I'm not disputing your intent, I said. Then what are you disputing? She asked. I looked at the laptop. The method, I said, and the assumption that my silence meant consent. She nodded slowly. I didn't think you'd want to be burdened with it, she said. You trust systems. You trust process. I trust transparency, I said. There's a difference. She swallowed. The knock at the door startled us both. We turned at the same time. I hadn't been expecting anyone. I opened the door to find a woman standing on the porch, mid-40s, professional but slightly nervous. Mark Henson? She asked. Yes. My name is Evelyn Carter, she said. I'm with North Shore Risk Review. I apologize for dropping by unannounced. Megan stiffened behind me. Evelyn glanced past my shoulder, then back at me. There was some confusion regarding authorization records, she said. I was in the area and thought it might be helpful to speak in person. Helpful. That word again. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit. She stood near the entryway, tablet in hand. I'll be brief, she said. Our firm was asked to validate an existing framework. During that process, we identified inconsistencies that required direct confirmation. Inconsistencies? I asked. Yes, she said. Specifically, instances where proxy acknowledgement appears to have been accepted without documented limits. She glanced at Megan. This isn't an accusation, Evelyn added quickly. It's a procedural issue. Megan found her voice. I acted in good faith. I'm sure you did, Evelyn said. But good faith doesn't override scope. The room felt smaller. What happens now? I asked. Evelyn hesitated. That depends, she said, on whether you wish to ratify prior actions or request reassessment. Ratify. Reassessment. The choice hung in the air. I looked at Megan. She looked back at me. Something close to fear in her eyes. Not fear of punishment, but fear of being seen clearly for the first time. I don't want anyone punished, I said slowly. I want clarity. Evelyn nodded. Then clarity is what we'll pursue. She handed me her card. We'll be in touch, she said, and left as quietly as she'd arrived. The door closed behind her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The truth hadn't emerged because I'd forced it out. It had emerged because the system had reached a point where it couldn't reconcile itself anymore. Megan finally broke the silence. I never meant to take your choices away, she said. I know, I replied, and that was the most unsettling part. Because now that everything was visible, I understood something else. Stopping this completely would cost Megan more than she deserved to lose. and letting it continue even in a reduced form would cost me more than I was willing to give. The reveal wasn't just about what had been done. It was about what kind of ending I was willing to choose next. And that decision, quiet, irreversible, was still ahead of me. After Evelyn Carter left, the house stayed quiet in a way that felt different from before. Not tense, not heavy, exposed. Megan sat at the kitchen island long after the door closed, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. The tea inside had gone cold. I could see it by the thin film on the surface, the way liquid settles when no one is paying attention anymore. For the first time since this began, there was nothing left to uncover. No hidden documents, no unexplained signatures, no future-dated plans waiting in a folder. Everything was out in the open, and that made the next part harder, not easier. "I can fix this," Megan said finally. Her voice was steady again, the way it got when she shifted into problem-solving mode. "I can tell them it was my decision, that I overstepped, that I misunderstood scope." I didn't answer right away. "I'll take responsibility," she continued. "If that's what it takes to reset everything." Die. She was offering herself as the fault line. A clean break, a clear narrative. One person made a mistake, and the system corrected it. It would be satisfying. It would also be dishonest, because the truth was more complicated than that. "You didn't misunderstand," I said quietly. "You followed the logic they gave you." She looked at me sharply. "That doesn't make it right." "No," I agreed. "But it doesn't make you the villain either." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. "You were scared," I said. "About me. About what happens when people assume someone else will step in." Her shoulders slumped. "I watched Mom fall apart after Dad died," she said. "Everyone said they'd help. No one did. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again." "I know," I said. That was the moral knot at the center of all this. Megan hadn't acted out of greed, or control, or impatience. She'd acted out of fear. And fear, when wrapped in professional language and procedural approval, becomes very difficult to confront without collateral damage. Evelyn's question replayed in my head. Ratify prior actions or request reassessment? On paper, it was simple. Ratification would legitimize what had been done. It would close the audit, preserve relationships, protect Megan's professional credibility, avoid escalation. Reassessment would unwind the structure entirely. It would trigger reviews, documentation, possible sanctions not just for Megan, but for the consultants who'd enabled it, the administrators who'd accepted proxy acknowledgments without clear limits. It would also place me under scrutiny, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because reassessment demands evaluation. Capacity, intent, stability, the very process I'd worked so carefully to slow, would restart this time in full daylight. I understood then that there was no option that delivered pure justice. There was only harm distribution. Someone would lose something, no matter what I chose. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from the past few years. Laura's illness, Mom's decline, Megan stepping in again and again, quietly, efficiently. I thought about the consultants, people like Daniel Reeves, who'd looked at my life through spreadsheets and risk models, not out of malice, but because that was how they were trained to see the world. I thought about myself. How willingly I'd traded vigilance for comfort. How easily I'd mistaken stability for safety. By morning, the answer was clear, not because it was right, but because it was the only one I could live with. I called Evelyn Carter at 9:12 a.m. She answered on the second ring. "I've made a decision," I said. "I'm listening," she replied. "I want a limited reassessment," I said, "focused on future governance, not retroactive accountability." There was a pause. "That's unusual," she said carefully. "I know," I replied. "I'm not asking you to ignore what happened. I'm asking you to contextualize it." "In what way?" "Frame prior actions as precautionary," I said. "Well-intentioned, but insufficiently scoped. Emphasize process correction, not fault." She was quiet for a long moment. "That would protect the parties involved," she said. "Yes," I said, "at the cost of full transparency." "And you're comfortable with that?" she asked. I closed my eyes. "No," I said, "but I'm comfortable with the alternative even less." When the call ended, I felt no relief, just resolve. That afternoon, Megan came over again. I told her what I'd decided. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something close to grief. "You're protecting me," she said. "I'm protecting the truth from becoming a weapon," I replied. "There's a difference. Their works. But they'll never know how far it went," she said. "They'll never know what I did." "I know," I said. "And so do you." She shook her head slowly. "That's not justice." "No," I agreed. "It's restraint." She laughed once, hollow. "You always did believe systems could be guided instead of broken." "I believe people can be," I said. The reassessment moved forward quietly. Language was revised. Authority was clarified. Proxy acknowledgments were restricted. Future planning required explicit, time-bound consent. On paper, it looked like a win. In reality, it was a compromise built on silence. Megan retained her standing. The consultants adjusted their models. The administrators updated their checklists. No one was punished. No one apologized, either. The system learned, but it didn't confess. And that was the twist I hadn't anticipated when this began. The victory wasn't exposure. It was choosing not to destroy someone who believed they were saving me. That choice came with its own cost. There would always be a part of me that wondered what might have happened if I'd chosen differently. If I'd forced the full truth into the open and let consequences fall where they may. But there was also clarity. Power doesn't always mean forcing accountability. Sometimes it means absorbing it. The system moved on. So did Megan. And I returned to my life changed, but intact. What I lost wasn't money or control. It was innocence. The belief that good intentions protect you from harm. They don't. They just make the harm quieter and easier to justify. That was the real ending. Not justice served, but a choice made. One I would carry with me, long after everyone else had filed this away as a resolved case. Life didn't snap back into place after everything settled. It slid, quietly, gradually, almost politely. That was the strangest part. There was no dramatic reset, no moment where I woke up and felt like myself again. Instead, the days resumed their shape while carrying a different weight. The way a familiar room feels altered after you've learned what happened there when you weren't watching. Monday mornings returned. So did early alarms, coffee brewed in the same chipped mug, traffic reports that never changed. At work, no one treated me differently. My performance reviews stayed steady. My inbox filled and emptied like it always had. From the outside, nothing about my life looked disrupted. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. I no longer mistook calm for safety. Megan and I settled into a new rhythm. Not distant, not estranged. Careful. She still came over on Sundays, but not every week. When she did, she asked before bringing paperwork. When she spoke about plans, she phrased them as questions, not assumptions. We avoided the subject most days. Not because it was forbidden, but because we both understood that revisiting it too often would reopen wounds neither of us wanted to tend. Once, a few months later, she said, "I still think about it sometimes." "So do I replied. That was all that needed to be said. The system moved on quickly. That didn't surprise me. Consultants updated templates. Administrators revised policies. Risk models adjusted to account for lessons learned. No one referenced my case directly. It became part of aggregated data, anonymized, abstracted, stripped of emotion. I'd expected anger to surface later. It didn't. What replaced it was something colder and more precise. Awareness. I noticed things now. The way language softened control. The way concern was used to justify access. The way decisions drifted away from the people they affected most. At work, I caught myself intervening earlier, not with authority, but with questions. I asked junior analysts to explain not just what they were recommending, but who it removed from the process. Some of them looked confused. A few looked uncomfortable. But over time, the culture shifted slightly. That mattered to me more than I expected. At home, I reorganized. Not dramatically. Just enough. I moved important documents into a safe I controlled. Updated passwords. Named contingencies explicitly. with limits and expiration dates, not because I feared being managed again, but because I understood how easily good intentions could be misused. I didn't cut Megan out. I clarified where she stood. And clarity, I learned, is a kindness when used early. There were moments, quiet ones, usually late at night when doubt crept in. I'd replay the alternative path in my mind. What if I'd forced full accountability? What if I'd let the system expose itself completely? What if Megan had faced consequences severe enough to ensure nothing like this ever happened again? In those moments, the answer was never simple. Justice has a cost. So does mercy. I chose mercy, knowing it would never feel clean. That choice didn't make me noble. It made me responsible for what followed. Over time, I noticed something else. Megan changed too. She became less efficient in a way that mattered. She paused more often, asked permission where she once assumed, let others struggle through uncertainty instead of smoothing it over immediately. Once, she told me, I didn't realize how much I equated control with care. Neither had I. That might have been the only true correction the system ever made. Not on paper. In people, the future dated document never resurfaced. I asked about it once, casually, during a follow-up call months later. It was archived, I was told. Rendered obsolete. Obsolete. The word made me smile, just slightly, because I knew something they didn't. Documents don't become obsolete on their own. People make them so. As the year turned, my life settled into something quieter but sharper. I traveled a little. Took fewer meetings that didn't require my presence. Said no more often, and explained myself less. I stopped assuming that silence was neutral. Silence, I'd learned, is interpreted. One evening, while cleaning out a drawer, I found the old notebook, the one I'd used when everything first began. The pages were filled with observations, timelines, fragments of realization. At the bottom of the last page, I added one final line. The greatest risk isn't being overpowered. It's being slowly removed from your own decisions, while everyone insists it's for your good. I closed the notebook and put it away. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't need to carry it anymore. The story didn't end with punishment. It didn't end with triumph. It didn't end with justice, the way stories are supposed to. It ended with something harder. Responsibility. For my boundaries. For my voice. For recognizing when comfort becomes a trap. If there's a warning in all of this, it isn't about trust. Trust is necessary. The warning is about delegation without visibility, about mistaking care for consent, about assuming that people will wait for permission when systems reward initiative. I still believe in doing the right thing. I just no longer believe it absolves you from paying attention. Because the truth is simple, and it doesn't announce itself when it arrives. If you don't stay present in your own life, someone else eventually will, and they'll swear they're doing you a favor. By the time you realize the cost, the decision may already have been made. That's what almost happened to me. Almost.